I almost didn't go that day. My daughter had called the night before, her voice carrying that careful tone she uses when she's trying not to worry me. "Dad, are you sure you want to do this alone? I can drive you." I told her I was 67 years old, not 107, and that I was perfectly capable of sitting across from a lawyer without a chaperone. She laughed, but it wasn't her real laugh. I knew the difference. I'd been knowing the difference for 41 years. My wife Dorothy used to say I had a gift for reading a room. She said God gave me wide-open eyes but a slow-moving mouth, and that combination had kept me out of trouble more times than I deserved. I thought about that on the drive to Hartwell and Associates that Tuesday morning. I thought about Dorothy the way I always do, not with the sharp ache of the first year, but with something quieter, a low hum, the kind that never stops but stops hurting quite so much. She'd been gone 4 years, and I was finally doing what she'd asked me to do before the end. "Get the will straight, Walter," she'd told me from that hospital bed, her hand still warm in mine even then. "Don't leave things messy. You worked too hard." So that's what I was doing, getting things straight. I pulled into the parking lot of Hartwell and Associates on Meridian Boulevard at 9:43 in the morning. It was a Tuesday in October, and the Georgia air had finally decided to act like fall. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the glass front of the building, thinking about how strange it is to sit across from a stranger and tell them what you want to happen to everything you've spent a lifetime building. I had done well. I won't pretend otherwise, because Dorothy always said false modesty was just pride wearing a disguise. 38 years in commercial real estate, 3 properties I still owned outright, a house in Decatur that was paid off before my son Marcus turned 10, a retirement account that let me sleep without worry. None of it came easy. All of it came from waking up before the sun and refusing to quit when things got hard. And I had 2 children to leave it to. Marcus was 41. My son, my firstborn. He had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and for most of his life I'd considered that a fine combination. He worked in finance in Atlanta, drove a nice car, lived in a nice condo in Midtown. He called on Sundays usually. He came to dinner on holidays mostly. He was present in the way a photograph is present. You can see the person, but you can't quite reach them. My daughter Renee was 38. She lived 20 minutes from me in Stone Mountain with her husband Jerome and their 2 kids, my grandchildren Caleb and Amara. Renee called on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not because I asked her to, but because she said she liked the sound of my voice. She was the one who sat with me every single day during Dorothy's last 6 weeks. She's the one who learned how to change the IV line because she didn't want her mother to have to wait for a nurse every time. She's the one who held my hand in the parking lot after we left the hospital for the last time and didn't say a single word, just held on. I tell you all this so you understand what I walked into that building believing. I believed I knew my family. I believed I had raised 2 good people. I believed that whatever came after me, they would handle it with grace. I was about to find out how wrong I was about one of them. The offices of Hartwell and Associates were quiet in the way that expensive places tend to be quiet. Dark wood, low lighting, the faint smell of leather. A young receptionist with reading glasses perched on her nose smiled and offered me water, which I declined, and coffee, which I accepted. I sat in a chair that probably cost more than my first car and waited for Robert Hartwell, who had been my attorney for 11 years. Robert came out himself to get me, which he always did. He's a tall man, thin in the shoulders, with the kind of silver hair that looks distinguished on men and unfair on women. We shook hands and walked back to his office, and that was when I saw Marcus. He was already seated in one of the chairs across from Robert's desk. He stood when I walked in, smiling, arms open. "Dad, surprise." I stopped walking. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it matters. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something colder than both. A stillness, like the air before a storm when every living thing goes quiet. "Marcus," I said, "I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to be here for this," he said. "Support you, you know, big day." I looked at Robert. Robert looked at his desk. That told me something. I sat down. I smiled back at my son, and I kept my wide-open eyes exactly where Dorothy had always told me to keep them. Robert walked us through the existing documents. First, the will I drafted 6 years ago, the power of attorney arrangements, the property deeds. Standard review. My eyes were on the papers, but my attention was on Marcus. The way he leaned forward when Robert mentioned the Decatur house. The way his finger tapped once, twice on the armrest when the retirement account balance appeared on the summary sheet. He was adding things up. Now, Robert said, folding his hands on the desk, you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to make some revisions. That's right, I said. I want to add a charitable trust component. A portion of the estate going to St. Matthew's Community Foundation. Dorothy was on their board for 12 years. Of course, Robert said, writing something down. Dad? Marcus's voice was easy, practiced. That's real generous. But have you thought about the tax implications? Because depending on how much you're talking about redirecting, I have a financial advisor's son, I said, and an accountant. I thought about it. Right. He nodded. I just want to make sure you're protected. I looked at him. I appreciate that. The meeting continued. Robert outlined a few options for the charitable component, and I listened, and Marcus sat there being helpful, being reasonable, being exactly the kind of son who would fly down from Atlanta on a Tuesday morning just to support his father at an estate planning meeting. It was on the drive home that my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a Georgia area code, so I answered. Mr. Gaines, a woman's voice, young, careful. My name is Teresa Campos. I'm a paralegal at Hartwell & Associates. I was in the back office this morning during your meeting. A pause. I need to talk to you, not on the firm's time. Can we meet? I pulled into a gas station on Covington Highway and sat with the engine running. What's this about? I said. Your son, she said. He came in last week, without you. The stillness again, that cold, quiet air. Tell me where, I said. We met at a diner on Memorial Drive, a place called Lucille's that had been there since before I moved to the area. Red booths, laminated menus, coffee that came automatically. Teresa Campos was younger than I expected. Late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a blazer that was slightly too big for her. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup when I sat down across from her and looked at me with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say and is still not sure they should say it. I could lose my job for this, she said. Then why are you here? She looked down at her cup. My grandfather raised me. After my mom passed, he worked for 40 years in the same factory, saved every dollar, never asked anyone for a thing. She looked back up. He got taken advantage of by my uncle right before he died. Bad paperwork. Lost almost everything. She shook her head slightly. I just can't sit on something like this again. I nodded. Tell me. Marcus had come into the office the previous Wednesday, she told me. He'd met with a junior associate, not Robert Hartwell himself. He'd told the associate he was acting on his father's behalf. Pre-meeting prep, he called it. He'd asked to review the existing will. The associate, who was new and didn't know better, had let him look at a summary document. But that wasn't the part that concerned her. The part that concerned her was the conversation she'd overheard in the hallway afterward, when Marcus was on his phone, apparently not realizing anyone was nearby. She'd heard him say, the charitable piece is the problem. That's what's eating into the number. If we can get him to walk that back or at least cap it, we're looking at a significantly different split. No, he'll listen to me. He always has. I just need to be in that room. He'd come to the meeting to manage me, to make sure the charitable component, the thing I wanted to do in Dorothy's memory, stayed small or disappeared entirely. I sat with that for a moment. The coffee in front of me had gone untouched. Was there anything else? I asked. Teresa hesitated. He asked the associate a question about power of attorney, specifically about whether an existing POA could be quietly updated without a full review meeting. She looked at me carefully. The associate told him it wasn't standard procedure. He said he understood, but he asked twice. I drove home in silence. I'm a man who has always needed time to process things by walking. Dorothy used to track me by the wear pattern on my shoes. She said she could tell when something was bothering me because I'd come home with clean shoes and dirty laces. I walked around my block 3 times that afternoon. Past the oak tree I planted the spring Renee was born. Past the garden bed Dorothy put in along the back fence that I still maintain, badly because I can't bring myself to let it go. I thought about Marcus at 10 years old riding his bike down this same street. The way he would run into the house after school and go straight to the kitchen, talking before he even got through the door. I thought about the look on his face at our wedding anniversary dinner 5 years ago. The one Dorothy insisted on, even though she already knew she was sick. The one where she made each of us say something true about the people we loved. Marcus had looked at me that night and said, "Dad, you built something real. I hope I can do half as well." I had believed him. I stopped at the end of my driveway and stood there in the cooling afternoon light, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet, not without knowing more. Dorothy always said that confronting a person too early was like reaching into fog. You couldn't grab what you couldn't see clearly. I needed to see clearly first. I called Robert Hartwell the next morning, not to his office line, to his cell, which he'd given me years ago and which I had never used until that moment. "Robert," I said, "I need to know something, and I need you to be straight with me. Was my son in your office last week?" The silence before he answered told me most of what I needed to know. "Walter, Robert." A long exhale. "He was. He spoke with one of our associates. I wasn't made aware until after the fact. I want you to know that nothing was filed, nothing was changed, and what he asked about is not something we would act on without your direct instruction and presence. But you were going to tell me when." Another pause. "I was trying to determine how to handle it. I didn't want to damage your family relationship without being certain." "Robert," I said, "you work for me, not for my family, not for my son, for me. Do you understand that?" "Yes," he said, quietly. "I do. I'm sorry, Walter. I'm coming in on Friday," I said, "without Marcus, and we're going to make some changes." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. The house was very quiet. On the wall across from me was a photograph Dorothy insisted on framing. The two of us at Amara's first birthday. Me holding my granddaughter, Dorothy leaning in with that smile she saved from moments she knew she wanted to remember. I talked to the photograph, the way I do sometimes. "You told me to watch," I said. "You always told me to watch." I called Renee that evening. Not to tell her everything, not yet. But I needed to hear a voice I trusted completely. She answered on the second ring, slightly out of breath. "Jerome and the kids were having dinner," she said. Caleb had put spaghetti on his head, which she said with the kind of laugh that meant she'd already taken pictures. "Dad, you okay?" she asked. "You sound a little—" "I'm fine," I said. "I just wanted to hear how you were." She told me about the kids, about Jerome's new project at work, about the rosebush she'd planted in a front yard that was finally taking, and I sat there in my kitchen listening and feeling the specific gratitude of a man who knows what it is to be loved without conditions. "Renee," I said, before we hung up, "you know I see you, right? Everything you do, I see it." She went quiet for a moment. "Dad, where is this coming from?" "Nowhere," I said. "I just don't say it enough." "You say it plenty," she said softly. "You just use actions instead of words. Mom always said that's how she knew you were the one. I didn't trust my voice after that, so I told her I loved her and let her get back to her family." Friday arrived. I went to Hartwell and Associates at 10 in the morning. Just me and Robert. We spent 2 hours going through everything. I expanded the charitable trust, increased it. Dorothy's portion would go to St. Matthew's Foundation and to a nursing scholarship at Georgia State, because Dorothy had started nursing school before she had Marcus, and always wondered who she might have been if she'd finished. I restructured the asset distribution. Renee and Marcus would both receive inheritances. I wasn't cutting my son out of his future because I'm not a man who acts from anger. But the power of attorney was revised. Renee was named sole healthcare proxy. A third-party fiduciary was added as a check on any future estate transactions, and I added a clause that required any modifications to the will to be conducted in person, with both my attorney and an independent witness, after a mandatory 30-day reflection period. In other words, no one was reaching into this without me knowing every detail. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes. I thought about what I was going to do about Marcus, not the legal part. That was handled. The harder part, the father part. I called him that evening. He answered on the third ring. "Dad, I've been meaning to call you. How'd the rest of the estate stuff go?" "It went well," I said. "Everything's in order." "Good, good. Did you end up doing the charity thing?" "I did," I said. "I actually expanded it." I said. "I actually expanded it." A beat of silence. "Oh, well, that's real generous, Dad." "Marcus," I said, "I want to have dinner with you, just the two of us, next weekend. Can you come down?" "Of course," he said, and his voice shifted slightly, brighter, easier. "Yeah, absolutely. I'll drive down Saturday." "Good," I said. "We have some things to talk about." He came on a Saturday that felt like summer pretending to be fall. I made a pot roast because it was what Dorothy always made when something important needed to be said at the table. She believed that good food kept people calm, and that people who were calm told the truth. We ate. We talked about football, about his job, about Caleb's soccer season. And then, when the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I looked at my son across Dorothy's table, and I told him what I knew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything I couldn't prove. I told him what I had heard, what I had confirmed, and what I had decided. He went pale, then red, then pale again. He tried to explain. It was just research. He was looking out for me. He was worried I didn't have the right information about the tax implications. He talked for a long time. I let him. And then I said, "Marcus, I need you to hear me. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I will not be managed. Not by anyone. Not even you." I looked at him the way Dorothy used to look at me when she needed me to really absorb something. I worked for 38 years. I sacrificed vacations and weekends and free time, and I put it all into building something. For this family, not for your account. For your security, yes, but also for your mother's legacy, and for your sister, and for those grandchildren I love more than I can say. It is not a transaction. It is not a number on a spreadsheet. Do you understand me? He was quiet for a long time. "I hear you, Dad," he said finally, not the rehearsed voice, something smaller. Something closer to the boy who used to come through the door already talking before he reached the kitchen. "I hope so," I said, "because I'm not going anywhere yet. And when I do go, I want to know that I left things and people in a condition I'm proud of." We sat there until the coffee went cold. It wasn't the dinner I'd imagined. It wasn't the reconciliation some people might have wanted, where everything gets resolved neatly and everyone walks out into the sunset. Real life doesn't work like that. There was still distance between us when he drove away that night. There would likely be distance for some time. But he knew, and I knew, and whatever happened next would be built on something real instead of something performed. That night I sat in the kitchen for a long time before going to bed. The house was quiet in the way houses get when most of your life has already happened inside them, full of a different kind of sound, memory instead of noise. I looked at Dorothy's photograph. "I got things straight," I told her. "Like you asked." I could almost hear her, not her words, but her presence. That steadiness she always carried, the kind that made every room feel more solid just by her being in it. I turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hall and went to sleep. And in the morning Renee called. 9:15, right on time. "Dad," she said, "Amara wants to know if you're coming to her recital Thursday." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "She wants to know if you'll sit in the front row." Where else would I sit? Renee laughed, her real laugh, the one that sounds exactly like her mother's. And I stood in my kitchen in the October light holding the phone and feeling the full weight of everything I had built and protected and refused to let go of. Some things you hold on to, not out of stubbornness, not out of fear, but because they are worth holding, and because the people who loved you first taught you that your hands were strong enough to do it.